Thank you for that warm applause. Actually, Americans are always nice people. They applaud before you hear anything. It's amazing. We're much more discerning down under. And as you can hear, yes, I'm from Atlanta, which is why I have the southern accent. That's our head office. You're not getting the normal smooth, dulcet Australian tones tonight. As you can tell, I've got a bit of a cold, and I apologise for that. And I just hope you bear with the croak and maybe the occasional cough. So, unfortunately, when you book these things, our ministry, we're booking 6 to 9 months in advance, most churches. At CMI, we speak in about 300, well, last year we spoke in 334 churches just in the US alone. We do about 1,200 ministry events worldwide each year. We have offices in 7 countries, and we're an information ministry. Our aim is to bring you information. And Scott, this morning, if you were here, he would have dealt with some of those stumbling block questions that people have. You know, you talk to people about the Christian faith and they come up to you with questions like, yeah, but, you know, if we all started from Adam and Eve, who did Cain marry? Where did the races come from? What about dinosaurs? Had those types of questions? Or this one, you know, why does a God of love allow bad things, death and suffering in the world? And that's what our ministry does. So we're faith-funded just by ordinary folks like yourself to go out and do that. When you see those books there, I always caveat. Some people think, wow, selling books on Sunday, what sacrilege. But that information actually comes about because people donate to us to produce information to answer those questions. And our aim is to equip you as believers. Hopefully you equip your families first and then you reach others with the information. And as Armand said, when I got into this particular subject, I grew up kind of a moderate science fiction fan. And I thought, wow, what a great way to reach people with the gospel, because I'm going to show you that actually science fiction has an evolutionary connection, as the title actually says there. So yes, our ministry all around the world, we're global. We employ lots and lots of scientists and PhDs and boys and girls. They got their degrees in the very same universities as their evolution-believing counterparts. It's not science that's the issue. We love science. Science is about things you can test and repeat, like gravity. Did you notice that? I'm going to repeat it. Let's test it. But the idea that, you know, dinosaurs evolved into birds 65 million years ago, well, nobody saw that. And you can't repeat it and you can't test it. So it falls out of the definition of what you and I commonly understand as science. So we're going to be talking about my book. Actually, I've just realised it's out of date. So there we go. It's in its 8th printing now. And you can see that little sticker there. I'll tell you an interesting story. That little sticker there, there it is. You see the no alien sign? There's a ministry in the US. They actually will give you those free stickers. They're called, it's freestickers.net. There you go, if you can remember that. And I asked them if I could borrow it for my website. And they said, sure. So I put that sticker back on my car. And it was back in 2005. It was the first book tour I did in the US for the release of this. And by the way, we don't say it's been an Amazon top 50 bestseller to boast, but to make the point, more non-Christians have actually read this book than Christians, we believe. See how you can use that subject matter to reach people. So I had that sticker on my car and I went back to my local shopping mall in Brisbane, Australia. And it was one of those, you know, multi-storey car parks. And you know what it's like when you're driving the car, it's noisy, the tyres squeal. And I parked my car and I was walking towards the mall entrance. And I heard this voice across the car park going, oi, mate, you, oi, stop. And I was at the doors and with about a dozen other people, and this man started pointing at us and running across the car park. I thought, hello, did I cut him off at a stop sign or something? And I was bracing myself, and he walked up to me breathless in the middle of a public shopping mall, and he said, hey, mate, I saw that sticker on your car. Where do you think aliens come from? And notice, not do they exist. See, polls show that 80% of Americans, and that must include a lot of Christians, believe that aliens have either visited the earth or are currently visiting the earth now. So here's what you can do. You'd remember 3 or 4 fast facts. And I said, well, do you know there's 150 UFO sightings every day, but no 2 UFOs have ever appeared exactly alike. They defy the laws of physics. They fly at incredible speeds. They merge into one another. They become one object and they go off in different directions. Then there's people who claim they've been abducted by aliens. They walk through the ceilings and then they go through the walls when they get taken up on the spaceship. And he kind of looked at me with his mouth open. He goes, I've never heard that stuff before. He said, how come you know so much? And I said, well, I just happen to have written a book on the subject, you know. And then I sold him a copy. But anyway, Wasn't hard to do because he had such a thirst for information. And that's generally what I found. When we made the movie, we went all over the world. We were setting up our cameras in hotel, office or meeting areas, and people were just coming in saying, "What are you doing?" Making a movie about UFOs and aliens. Oh, I love that stuff. And it opens the opportunity for the gospel. So Carl Sagan, you might remember him, some of you my vintage and a bit older. His TV show, Cosmos, the waves used to crash on the shore and he'd say, "The cosmos is all there is, ever was, or ever will be." Sagan was what we call a materialist, not as in acquiring wealth for yourself, but matter, atoms are all there ever are or ever will be. He wrote the largest selling science book of all time and was a former consultant to NASA. And he was an atheist. So for people like Sagan, though, there's always a problem. How did life begin? How did life begin on Earth? And, I could do a whole biology talk on telling you about natural selection and how it fits the creation model. But this man seated here, Francis Crick, that's his colleague James Watson, you might remember those names. They discovered the DNA molecule back in 1953. And Crick was an ardent atheist also. When he looked at the complexity of the human genome, DNA, so DNA is basically a chemical hard drive in the nucleus of the cell of every living creature, and in human beings we got about 1,000 Bibles worth of letters, 3 billion letters, all arranged one after the other to tell the cell to build a human being, what shade of skin or hair you're going to have. And when he was confronted with that information, he said, it was almost like looking at a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get life going. But hang on, he was an atheist, he didn't believe in miracles. So you think this is new? All those years ago, over 60 years ago, Francis Crick, when he looked at all of that design and complexity in the genome, he said, the aliens must have put it there. And ladies and gentlemen, that has become mainstream science today. Mainstream science today. And the reason is because of evolution. As this little guy says, if earthlings didn't believe in evolution, I wouldn't exist. Let me give you an example. You've all heard of the Big Bang. The Big Bang is not science, right? Why isn't it science? Well, it allegedly deals with a one-time event that happened in the past. No one saw it, you can't repeat it, right? That's not like doing tests like gravity, like I just mentioned a moment ago. So the Big Bang, let me explain it to you. In the beginning, they say there was nothing. And in this nothingness, there was a little kernel of energy that popped into existence for no reason, for no cause. Now, when I say nothing, here's going to bend your minds a little bit. There's no space, there's no matter, there's no universe. That's a bit hard to comprehend, isn't it? Because you and I live in a physical time-space universe. We can only understand those dimensions around us. But in this nothingness, this little pinhead's worth of energy appears, called a quantum fluctuation, and suddenly it expands. And E equals mc squared, right? Energy converts to matter, and over millions and billions of years, energy converts to matter. Little particles coalesce to form stars, planets, galaxies, and ultimately human beings. Now, why did I mention the Big Bang? Well, the very first UFO conference I went to many years ago, a UFO investigator stood up and he said, look, we know the great cosmic science experiment evolution works. Here we are, you and I are proof of it. And he said, in a 14-year-old universe as predicated by the Big Bang, there could be alien races out there that are 1 million or even 1 billion years older than we are here on Earth, right, on the evolutionary scale. Just imagine if they're 1 million years older than us on the evolutionary scale, they're 1 million years advanced in their technology, and that's how come they can build warp drive spaceships and visit the Earth, the type of stuff we see in science fiction. So the Big Bang is central to the idea of alien life. Now, of course, there is another option, because here on Earth, the only two games are in town are creation or evolution. So what about the idea of God creating aliens? Well, I'm going to deal with that as the very last subject tonight, because that is the most controversial. Because I've found that most Christians have no problem with the idea that God could have created alien life. So the Big Bang. Now, in case you think I'm being uncharitable, okay, in the way that I described it, this is a summary from the cover of Discover magazine, a secular magazine, summarizing Professor Alan Guth. He's the father of the inflation theory of the Big Bang, summarizing his work. And look what they said. The universe burst into something from absolutely nothing, zero nada, And as it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. So there you go. Does that sound like science to you? No. I love this cartoon. Let me get this straight. First there was nothing, and then it exploded. So what's the alternative? See, for me personally, the most profound passage in all of Scripture is the very first one. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And it's actually loaded with information because it tells us something important. God was there before the universe that he made. That's right? So that tells us something. He created the laws of physics that operate in our universe. That means he's not bound by them either. That's why we call it the supernatural realm. What is supernatural? That means he's above nature that he created. So when you see a miracle in the Bible, by the way, what was Jesus is the creator, right? What was his first miracle? I get everybody every time. If he's the creator, wasn't it creation? That's right. Jesus' first miracle was creation. Bringing matter into existence and enacting his will. And I think that when we see miracles, they're not a violation of natural law, as the skeptics like to say. They're an addition to natural law. That's what we can use science to tell when a miracle has taken place. Now, here's the issue, though. You see, people, and particularly teenagers, often come up to me and say, well, if God created the universe, who created God? And that's understandable. But the reason we ask that question is because we live in a time-space universe. We exist in time. We're experiencing one moment after the other. So as we sit here, think about anything physical in this universe. Think about this church. Somebody thought about it, built it, designed it. It had a beginning in time, and therefore it must have had a cause. If I picked a rock up off the ground or a leaf off the tree, it had a beginning in time. It must have had a cause, right? And how do we measure time? Well, here on the Earth, where the Earth rotates with a light source, a day. But if you lived on Venus, I think a Venusian day is about 230 Earth days. So how we measure time depends upon your position, in our solar system or wherever you live. But let's ask this question, okay? Everything which has a beginning has a cause. The universe had a beginning in time. It must have had a cause. But the Big Bangers say it pops into existence for no reason with no cause. And that violates the very science that they claim evolution is, because it violates something known as the law of causality. First cause. Everything which has a beginning has a cause. See, don't ever be intimidated by the claims of evolution being science. Evolution is full of supernatural events. How did the universe pop into existence out of nothing and violated scientific law? How did chemicals suddenly rearrange themselves to form the first proteins and the first cell? Because everything we see in nature shows that doesn't happen. Organized matter into complex living things requires intelligent input. I'll give you an example. If I grabbed a frog from the swamp here, right, and I put him in the blender and blended him up and did an experiment, what would we have? A mess, a frog smoothie, right? Okay, but anyway. But here's my point. We've got all the fats, the salts, the proteins, all the ingredients for life. Will it reassemble itself into a frog? No, because an intelligence needs to rearrange its matter to make it a complex living system. That's why Romans 1:12 tells us we can see that there's a creator from what has been made. But there's a problem. You and I live in a fallen world. Even as beautiful it is, that's why we get sick. That's why we get cancers. It's why people die. And when we look around, it should be a reminder to us that something is wrong with this world. And guess what? God did something about it in sending Jesus. And if he's the creator described in Genesis, guess what? He can create a new heavens and earth. I'm looking forward to that because I won't get any more sore throats. There'll be no more curse, no more suffering. It's all done away with, paid for by the blood of the Lamb. By the way, when I think about God being before the universe, that means time didn't exist, as you and I understand it. The Bible says he inhabits eternity. I used to think about eternity being millions of years in the past or millions of years in the future, but I've come to realize and believe that the eternity where God is timelessness. That's how he can tell the future, right? He doesn't exist in time as you and I understand it. The great I am, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. That's who God is. And when I think about that, And well, let me ask you, if he doesn't have a beginning in time, does he need a cause? No. See, that law only applies to things in our physical space-time universe. Those laws do not apply to him. Now your heads are hurting. I'll get on with the rest of the talk. So look at this. We see passages in Scripture like this one, you know. Job there talking about God say he hangs the earth upon nothing. Isaiah says he sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. I'm sorry if there's flat earthers here. That does not mean the earth is flat. In fact, the Hebrew word is kug, which correctly means a three-dimensional vaulted object or sphere. Okay? But the point is, even in Scripture, we can see that an outside supernatural intelligence has streamed information, what we call inspiration, to the Bible's authors. And we see that all throughout Scripture. Well, anyway, let's get into the juicy stuff. You all want to know about UFOs and aliens. So I grew up an Apollo kid. Sitting in front of my TV, I was fascinated with space. And you know, when we landed on the moon, we were due to go up in the missions to the 20s, but it got scrapped after Apollo 17. People lost interest. It was expensive. And this man here, Dan Golden, he took over. He was the former chief administrator of NASA, and he invented something called the Origins program, which runs today. The Hubble telescope is part of the Origins program, and they're looking specifically, if you look at their listings, for the evolution of life wherever it may occur in the universe. That's why they've got rovers on Mars. They think where there's water, there might be life. But life's a lot more complex than just H2O, isn't it? It's a very simple molecule. But notice what he said here. One of their goals is to search for Earth-like planets that may be habitable or inhabited. Sounds like they're looking for, you know, Obi-Wan Kenobi sitting in a cave in Tatooine somewhere, doesn't it? But it's not the type of life they're looking for. So the stuff you and I see in science fiction movies that causes us to ponder what else is out there is known as the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And, you know, we had those old B-grade science fiction movies in the 50s and the 60s. But what happens is as we've started to explore the universe and realise how big it is, it's become obvious that aliens, us, we just can't travel hundreds of millions of light years across the universe. I mean, just imagine, you know, our Milky Way galaxy, right, of which our sun is but one star in the Milky Way. We think there's about 200 billion stars, is 100,000 light years across. Now, a light year is not a measurement of time, it's a measurement of distance. But if you could travel at the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second, it would take you 100,000 years just to cross our Milky Way. So you'd have to raise your children to be nuclear physicists to run the engines on the ship, and they'd have to raise their children to be nuclear physicists. It would require multiple generations to make the trip, unless you got one of these babies. All right. So watch this, Pastor. They're in every church. All the Trekkies, hands up. Where are you? There they are. All right, live long and prosper. Okay. So these guys travel at warp speed. This is much faster than the speed of light. Factors exponentially faster by multiple factors. Excuse me. Now, I can confirm to you the most powerful vehicles we've ever built, mankind's ever built, are the Saturn V rockets that took man to the moon and the space shuttle. Now, if you can see just these two solid rocket fuel boosters here on the space shuttle, forget the main engines, just firing those two SRBs for 2 minutes, if you could convert that to electrical energy, you'd have enough power to fuel 87,000 homes for a full day. Just firing those for 2 minutes. And that's the most powerful vehicle we can build. And at the best speed we can produce today, it would take you 870,000 years to reach the next star to our own sun in our own Milky Way. And you haven't even begun to travel the universe yet. The next galaxy beyond our own Milky Way is Andromeda, and it's 2 million light years away. And the next one after that is 20 million light years away. And there are hundreds of billions of galaxies out there, all containing hundreds of billions of stars. So I'm going to tell you that I think traveling faster than the speed of light is impossible. And I get challenged all the time when people say, well, you can't say that. You don't know what technologies we might have in the future. That's true. But I'm going to show you, you actually have to violate the very laws of physics to be able to get there within our own lifetimes. I want you to imagine you had something about the size of a softball.
weighing, about a half a kilo. What's that? About 1.1 pound in weight. If I wanted to accelerate to that to just half the speed of light, represented by the letter C, okay, it would take the energy equivalents of 98 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs, just for something the size of a ball. Now, when I get going in the vacuum of space, it'll just keep going at that speed. So when I get to my destination, I have to use the same energy requirements to slow myself down. Now, I've been on that distant planet for a couple of months. I want to get home and see the wife, right? So I've got to speed myself up again. And then when I get to the Earth, I've got to slow myself down. So every return trip requires a fourfold input of that energy. Right? So incredible amount of power you would need. And space is not empty. It's actually full of dust, cosmic dust. It's estimated there's about 100,000 dust particles for every cubic kilometre of space. And if you impacted a grain of dust at even 1/10 of the speed of light, that would be like 10 tons of TNT going off on your spaceship. Now, the Star Trek fans here all know on the Starship Enterprise, they have these things called deflector arrays, right? Force fields. But guess what happens? You've got to use the same equally opposing force to repel something. You've just increased the energy requirements again. Another problem. Have a look at this. These are impacts to just a couple of panels on the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, he just sits there in geosynchronous orbit, in other words, matching the Earth's rotation. And not a lot of damage, but you can see all the stuff that's out there, okay? And that doesn't go anywhere near as fast as you need even to get around our solar system, let alone the galaxy. Let's go on. Here's the window of the former Space Shuttle Challenger, and a flake of paint, 0.2 of a millimetre in size, impacted the window there while it was in orbit. Look at the damage it did. Smaller than the head of a pin, a flake of paint. So you could just imagine if you were travelling at incredibly fast speeds, the damage it would cause. Other problems. G-forces. As we stand here on Earth, we measure Earth's gravity as 1G. Now, if any of you have been in the military or you know Air Force jet fighter pilots, they wear pressure suits. They learn to constrict their muscles to try to reduce their blood flow, because when they do high-speed manoeuvres, I mean, if you pulled even 9 Gs for a few seconds, you would black out. You'd lose control of your aircraft. But when, the Star Trek fans, you've seen Captain Jean-Luc Picard sit on board of the Starship Enterprise and he says, "Make it so," and they jump into warp factor 5 and do U-turns, well, you'd be like an egg splattered up against the wall, right? Now, of course, all the Star Trek fans, here's a test for you. What science fiction devices do they have to avoid you getting splattered up on the wall? There's always one. There you go. There's always one. Inertial dampeners. All right, that's what they are. Now, for those of you who don't watch Star Trek, you're not in on this and you've got no idea what we're talking about, do you? Okay. Well, I can advise you need to get a life. It's really good. Other problems are G-force, cosmic radiation. So as you fly in a plane, you get zapped with a little increased dose of cosmic radiation. So as you leave the safety of our Earth's atmosphere where we're shielded and your speed increases, you're going to get zapped with an increased dosage as well. And as your speed increases, it's going to become fatal for you. But the single biggest problem that you can travel around the universe faster than the speed of light is you can't travel faster than the speed of light. Good demonstrable scientific evidence, Einstein again, says that the maximum speed limit on our universe would be the speed of light. So can you remember back from your physics classes, as your speed increases, what else increases? Your mass. As you approach the speed of light, your mass becomes infinite. You can't summon enough energy from anywhere to get yourself to the speed of light. And so that's a big problem. But I can tell you, having been researching this subject for many years, people see things and they do have experiences. And the true UFO believers, the people that want there to be these highly evolved aliens, visiting the Earth, they've overcome that by coming up with something called the interdimensional hypothesis. And this is the view that aliens might be visiting us from other realms or dimensions or multiverses, etc. Now, I think they're getting close to the truth, because I'm going to show you the nature of what we see, and the nature of the experiences does suggest that entities are visiting us from another realm or dimension. And one of the exciting things we had when we made the movie, I mean, I don't know if any of you went to see it at the cinema or whatever, but we had a little post show at the end, and I said, hey, contact us, tell us your story. And, you know, some people wrote in and they said, yep, it was exactly what like you said, and they've got some closure on it. But, you know, the skeptics come in and they say, oh, you Christians, you just want to shoehorn it into your worldview all the time. I don't have to do it on this one, because both the Christian and the non-Christian researcher, we all agree about the nature of what we're seeing. We might disagree about its origin, but this is the most popular view held by ufologists today. So let's look at what people do see. Here we have Mexico 1997. This is one of the most videotaped, witnessed UFO events in history. These metallic-looking craft hovered in downtown Mexico City. And when you see that, everybody says, well, the government must know what's going on. It's interesting, the Mexican government are very honest and candid, and whenever they've had these types of events, they've said, here's the footage, we don't know what it is. In America, you say, we can neither confirm or deny. That's it. Truly, that's what they say. They won't give out any information. But in the movie, we met a radar operator from this event. Washington, 1952, these lights buzzed the Capitol dome of the White House. They were seen on 3 separate radar installations. Jet fighters were dispatched and the lights vanished into thin air. The Air Force landed, out came the lights again, seen over 2 separate weekends. A gentleman in the movie in his 80s now, we showed that the event was so well seen, it resulted in the largest gathering of the press since World War II. And we have that press conference in our movie, and you can see we can neither confirm or deny, but it's definitely not alien. That's what they said. And the man, one of the radar operators, he says he was told to shut up about it for all of these years. And he actually says in the movie, and you're the first guys I've met that actually want to know what happened. So Roswell, in case you don't know, Roswell's a town in the New Mexico desert where supposedly an alien flying saucer crash landed in 1947, and the government whisked away the bodies, and we reverse engineered some of the technology. By the way, the fact that we have lasers today, some people say is because of the Roswell crash. We managed to get the technology from them. That's the type of stuff people come up with. Roswell's a town like no other. Every July 4 weekend, the town doubles in size as people go there looking for meaning and purpose. Maybe the aliens can tell us where we come from. Then we can find out our meaning and purpose to life and what happens when we die. You know, when you ask those 3 big questions, that's the basis of our worldview or our religious beliefs. And ufology has become a substitute religion. By the way, that's my youngest daughter, Carla. When I'm in Atlanta, I have to say Carla, okay, so you understand. But standing next to a Coke machine, look at that. And there's the street lights in Roswell. Even the McDonald's is built in the shape of a flying saucer. It's big business. Even the big multinational corporations get in on it. So the 2 culprits in all of this are science fiction. Now, I love science fiction, don't get me wrong. But mums and dads, boys and girls, it's science fiction. Science fantasy, okay? And we're fascinated with it because it always has these futuristic events. These 2 rows are just some of the sci-fi movies. And I've been joking about Star Trek: The Next Generation, but did you know that's the most syndicated TV show in human history? At any one time, about 80 to 90% of the highest grossing movies of all time are sci-fi. It's the #1 most popular entertainment genre in the world. And most sci-fi today, what does it depict? Alien worlds, alien beings that look different to us. And I don't know if you realise, but the underlying message of that, and the reason the aliens look different, is evolution took a different turn in their planet's history. That's it. They're all evolving at different stages, and they're all at different stages in their technology. That's the theme of Star Trek, for example. But you know, I come from a pretty conservative Christian background, so when I started investigating this, I was confronted with a powerful spiritual reality that I was not prepared with. And as Christians, most of us, of course, we don't mix in those types of circles, but I want you to understand that people have never been in a church, who don't know the Lord Jesus, and if we read the Bible's pretty clear, there is a powerful spiritual realm out there, and there's spiritual activity going on, and that's what I was confronted with. So this lady claimed to be a Christian, and she did these drawings, And she was so excited to hear another Christian was getting involved in this UFO stuff. But she had an experience. She wrote to me and she said, she said, the aliens appeared in my room one night and they told me that Jesus was one of them. By virtue of his advanced technology, that's how he could raise the dead, turn water into wine. And she says UFOs, aliens, in other words, parted the Red Sea. Elijah was raptured into a flying saucer. And Moses was spoken to in the burning bush by a radio transmitter beamed down from the mothership. Well, you know, we laugh, but I've been challenged on that many times. UFO believers love the Bible. They claim it's a record of the primitive Bible writers recording visits of advanced extraterrestrials, you see, and they mistook them for gods. That's how come Jesus could turn water into wine. It was by virtue of his advanced technology, etc. Now, some of you might remember a movie years ago called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Remember, it was Spielberg's third movie. In fact, Spielberg's made more movies about aliens than anything else. Now, I don't know if you remember that movie. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it on Netflix or something. It's actually a good movie. A lot of people don't know that Spielberg based it on real research by two people, two scientists. And the first one, was this man, Dr. Jacques Vallée. Excuse me one moment. And if you remember, the lead investigator for the US government in the movie was a Frenchman. It was actually based upon this man. And he wrote this back in 1979. He said, belief in the reality of UFOs is spreading rapidly at all levels in society throughout the world. Books and periodicals appear at an ever-increasing rate. And he said they were authored by people of the UFO generation who were born just after World War II and who grew up with these science fiction kind of movies. And they've grown into influential positions in the media. Spielberg, case in point. If you've got a Hewlett and Packard computer, they've donated money to SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Paul Allen, one of the co-founders of Microsoft, has donated millions to the search for extraterrestrial life. And the other person in the movie who was a collaborator of Dr. Vallée was this man, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And if some of you watch the History Channel, there's a TV series at the moment, fictionalized, recording his work. It's called Project Blue Book. Blue Book was an investigation by the US government into UFOs, and it ran for over 20 years. And they enlisted this man to head it up. And at the movie Close Encounters, he makes a little cameo at the end when the flying saucer lands. You can see him come out. Spielberg's kind of paying homage to him. Now, both Vallée and Hynek were not Christians, and they're the ones that came up with this idea of the interdimensional hypothesis because they thought it fit the evidence well. Look what Hynek wrote. He said, certainly the phenomenon has psychic aspects. I don't talk about them very much because to a general audience, the words psychic and occult have bad overtones. They say it's all crazy, but the fact is there are psychic things. He said, people have had these UFO experiences. He said, they've developed psychic ability. And UFOs can appear, disappear, materialize, he says. And he goes on, he says, there's been reported cases of precognition where people had forewarning or foreknowledge they were going to see something. There's been a change of outlook, a change of philosophy of persons' lives. You know what that means? A change of their worldview. He said, they're rather tricky things to talk about openly, but it's there. Many people like Jacques Vallée and I feel to some extent it might be a conditioning process. Bingo. People's lives are changed often as a result of either their sighting or the fact that some entity visits them in a room at night. Now, he used words like psychic, paranormal, paraphysical. As Christians, what terms might we use to describe the same phenomena? Spiritual, right? Supernatural, okay? I'll give you an example. The Bible records visitations from a supernatural realm, right? Angels, good ones, bad ones, but one very important visitor was the Lord Jesus. And in his trial before Pilate, he said, you know, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is from another place. I am from above, he said. You are from below. You know, and the same Lord Jesus, the Creator, warns us in Matthew 24. He says, false Christs and false prophets will appear, perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. Who's the elect he's talking about? That's the church. So they were getting a heads up. Don't be taken in by powerful signs and wonders. Could it be referring to these incredible things that we see in the sky? You know, in the movie, we showed some snippets from a conference at the Washington Press Club. Yep, up in Washington. And 80 Air Force officers got up one after the other and gave testimony. These are officers with a lot more to lose than to gain from telling their stories. And they reported seeing these objects on radar fly at over 7,000 miles an hour. We don't have planes that can go that fast, all right, in case you don't know that. Merge into one object, go in different directions, and even enter our missile silos and affect the operational readiness of our nuclear weapons. You see? It's hard things to believe, and I understand that, but that's what they see, and so you can bet the government takes notice. But if we are dealing with something supernatural, the government doesn't recognise the supernatural realm, does it? They're not going to say, oh, we think it's a demon or it's fallen angels. Of course not. So don't be surprised if we're coming to the day when these things are, because they're increasing, when they may turn around and say, well, it must be coming from another realm or dimension. It must be alien in nature. And perhaps the world is being set up for a great fall at that particular time. The nature of UFOs, as in unidentified flying objects, that's all they are. Do you know they've been seen throughout history? They're not new. American Indians have stories of flying canoes with people on board. The ancient Romans and Greeks say they saw flying shields. Again, in the movie, we have a story. Alexander the Great said he saw flying shields that attacked his army. Okay? So they've been seen on radar by multiple credible witnesses. They perform aerial manoeuvres, as I've said, that defy the laws of physics. Sometimes there are electrical outages, just like the movie Close Encounters, etc. Here's a picture of one that's not been explained. And by the way, I should say over 95% can always be explained. The problem is it's lay people looking up. And because of science fiction and evolution and other worlds, we look up and we don't know what we're looking at and we go, wow, it might be a UFO. But UFO doesn't mean unidentified flying object. It means a spaceship piloted by aliens today, right? This will surprise you. You know what the most mistaken UFO is? It's the planet Venus. It accounts for 27% of all sightings. And it just sits there early in the night sky as a bright light. But this is that classic cigar shape that people often talk about because we see it as a two-dimensional image. Often they make no noise. They don't even accelerate. They're there and shoom, they're gone. They kind of reach this instantaneous speed. That's the pattern that's performed. So we can't lasso a UFO like that and kind of bring it in and do empirical scientific tests on it, can we? So there is one area where we can unpick what's going on, and that's where people claim to have these abduction experiences. Polls claim that up to 4 million Americans claim they've been abducted by aliens. And I can tell you, they're not all nutcases, cranks. Some of them are doctors, lawyers, very professional people, as well as lots of ordinary people. So researchers like me, we use something called the classic abduction syndrome, or the CAS. It's a set of markers. There are 8 of them. Not everybody has all 8. But generally they fall within this grouping. You know, it's a bit like having symptoms of an illness. You know, if I went to the doctor and said I've got a sore throat, fever, he'd tell me I've got a virus, right? So often people say they're driving their car at night and they see a light. And they stop and they look at it and that's the last thing they remember. Or it happens in their room. They see a being in their room. Last thing they remember. And then they wake up hours later. And that's known as missing time. It's one of the most common factors. And they can't remember what happened during that missing time. And here's where the problem starts. They think they've seen something to do with extraterrestrials and they go off to a UFO research centre. There are hundreds of them around the States and they're headed by MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, the world's largest group here in the US. And often they'll sit there and they'll get hypnotically regressed with the aim of trying to recapture alleged lost memories during that missing time. And I've got a whole talk on that subject alone because that's the key. It's on the table there. It's called Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. But under hypnosis, they recount being on board a spaceship, having telepathic conferences with alien beings. They have a theophany. A theophany is a manifestation of a divine being. We have them in the Bible. Like the 3 angels that sat with Abraham, for example, was a theophany. They're told to consciously forget their events. And sometimes, it's really disturbing, they show physical marks, scratches and bruises and things on them that they have no recollection of getting. Now let me just stop here, because when we think about the spiritual realm, we think about kind of ghostly, ethereal spirit beings, don't we? But actually, is that how the Bible records manifestations of fallen angels? No, when they manifest physically. In fact, God's destroying angels when they came in. They did a lot of stuff. Think about the plagues of Egypt, and they killed one of them killed 170,000 Syrian soldiers in one night. And it's troubling, because the issue is we can't go to that spiritual realm. But I've come to understand, I think, the spiritual realm is not only spiritual, because think about it, actually we're spiritual beings too, aren't we? But we're physical. But there may be a physical aspect, or at least as it manifests in our world, it manifests physically. Here's a challenge. Think about Moses and Aaron before Pharaoh in his court. We know the story. Aaron throws down his staff and God turns it into a snake. We don't have a problem with that because God's the creator, right? But then what did the magicians do? They threw down their staff and what happened? Became a snake. Was that an illusion or a real snake? It was a real snake because Aaron's snake ate the other snake. That's a pretty troubling concept, to think that perhaps Satan, he can't create, but somehow he might be able to manipulate matter or the appearance of things in our particular realm. Don't ask me, because I just do not know. But I believe what I read in Scripture. So the nature of these abductions, people say, they saw the beings walk through the walls and the ceilings and they got taken out. They often are paralyzed, known as sleep paralysis. They don't have any conscious recollection of it. Very similar to out-of-body or near-death experiences that people have. Here's something they don't know. People talk about hovering above the hospital operating bed and they see a white light. One of the most common factors is they see their deceased relatives standing on the other side and aliens. That can't be happening, can it? So it gives you an example of the illusory power that can be created in the mind, and the problem is hypnosis. Not that they're being hypnotized to recount them, but I believe at the moment of the abduction event, through hypnosis, and this is what people don't realize, you can supplant false memories, and when the person wakes up, they cannot distinguish them from fiction. That's a medical phenomenon that is known through hypnosis, and I think that's what's actually happening. So I'm giving you a lot more detail, you folks, than I normally would give in these talks, but I know you've all come out especially for this. So I'm going to show you some quotes from some of the world's leading abduction researchers, and when I read these to you, I want you to keep in mind, these are not Christians. So they're kind of hostile witnesses to my cause. Donna Higby, she's hypnotically regressed hundreds of people, and she said this. She said, I noticed a drastic change in the attitude of several of the abductees from one meeting to the next. People who've been traumatized all their lives by ongoing abductions had only anger and mistrust for their non-human abductors, and they started saying that everything that was told or shown to them was for their own good and that they were helping the abductees to evolve spiritually. See, in the stories they get is in the future we won't even need spacecrafts. We'll all be spirit beings and we can will ourselves around the universe. She said by accepting this information, the abductees stopped fighting and instead became passive and controlled. Let me just halt there. That's a medical phenomenon known as Stockholm Syndrome. Have you ever heard of that? That's where people can be kidnapped by terrorists, they're locked in a room, and the isolation of the experience, well, the only people they can relate to are the ones that are doing the abusing to them. Think of Patty Hearst some years ago. Remember when she was captured? So that's a real medical phenomenon. That's what happens. I mean, you can't exactly go to work tomorrow morning and say, well, hey, let me tell you what happened last night. I was abducted by aliens and I went on board a spaceship. See, it's your little secret and the little secret of the people, the events or the entities that are doing it to you. She said, and this is important, I found this was a pattern repeating itself over and over again around the country. I became concerned that abductees were accepting explanations from entities that we know can be deceitful. And again, you don't have to believe little Joe Christian here. You talk to the secular UFO researchers. They are staggered why these highly evolved, allegedly benevolent beings would come and fly millions of light years to come and lie to us. If they're looking after us, why do they stealthily abduct us in the middle of the night and people suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome? Let me be very blunt here. If somebody lies to you, what does that make them? A liar. And the Lord Jesus had something to say about the world's ever biggest liar. He said he is a liar, the father of lies, and there is some truth in him. Is that what he said? No, no truth in him. You know what I take that? That Satan is so given over with hatred for his creator, because he's defeated already, right? And he can't get his story straight. He'll say anything to get people's eyes off the Lord Jesus. And it doesn't matter whether it's UFOs or supernatural or false religions. They all have the same lies behind them, ladies and gentlemen. I'll explain that in a moment. This man, John Keel, was a very prolific researcher. He wrote a bunch of books. One of them was called The Mothman Prophecies. You may remember that was made into a movie starring Richard Gere. And again, he's not a Christian to the best of my knowledge. Look what he says. He says, the devil and his demons can, according to the literature, manifest themselves in almost any form and can physically imitate anything from angels to horrifying monsters with glowing eyes. Strange objects and entities materialize and dematerialize in these stories, just as the UFOs and their splendid occupants can appear, disappear, walk through walls, and perform other supernatural feats. He says demonology is not just another crackpotology. Thousands of books have been written on the subject, many of them authored by educated clergymen, scientists, and scholars, and uncounted numbers of well-documented events are readily available to every researcher. See, every researcher, I could find this stuff. But what happens, people have a UFO experience, they go off to a UFO research centre, they don't tell you about that because it conflicts with their wannabe worldview that these are really aliens visiting the earth. So if you don't give people the other side of the story, you're giving them a half-truth, aren't you? You're only giving them enough information designed to persuade them into your belief system. But look at this, he goes on and says, the occurrences described in this imposing literature, that's how he described this, that much of it, are similar, if not entirely identical, to the UFO phenomenon itself. Victims of possession suffer the very same medical and emotional symptoms as the UFO contactees. You know, a wise man once wrote, there is nothing new under the sun. What we are dealing with, believe it or not, is the same old demonological phenomenon, dressed up in a new guise. See, the Bible is the history book of the universe. But unlike any other history book, this one not only tells us the past, it can tell us the future. How can God do that? Because he's outside of time. But when we go right back to the first book, the first deception took place. What does it mean to be deceived? It's a word we use, but it means you're going to be conned into believing something that isn't true. That's what happened to the first man and woman, and it's been happening ever since. And the term Lucifer, one of the names for Satan, or the devil, literally means bearer of light or being of light. Doesn't the Bible tell us in the New Testament, he masquerades as an angel of light? You shall be as gods. That's the same message abductees get today, ladies and gentlemen, as a result of their experience. You see, because think about it, that singular experience, no one else can understand. Stand in your bedroom and this is what people get told. You're special. I've chosen you. I've got a mission for you. And they become evangelists for this new cause. You know, in 1 Timothy 4:1, it says, the Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. You know, I mentioned Jacques Vallée before. He's wrote a ton of books on this stuff, and he showed that hundreds of years ago, people had these encounters with beings in the rooms called fairies. And we laugh at that today, right? They're just mythical beliefs of primitive people. But guess what? 150 years ago, fairies were pop culture. People believed in them. And the experiences they had with these alleged fairies are exactly the same today that people have with alleged aliens in their room. I mean, just imagine if a little fairy stood in your room and said, hey, I'm a fairy, well, you'd doubt your own sanity. But people don't doubt the fact that this being has come there and they've said, we've chosen you, I've flown millions of light years to give you a job. That's the deception taking place. And it's really powerful. It's a life-changing experience for these people. Here's what Dr. Vallée wrote again. I propose the hypothesis there is a control system for human consciousness, and what takes place through close encounters with UFOs is control of human beliefs. There it is. That's a non-Christian researcher saying that, ladies and gentlemen. And it's the control of the relationship between our consciousness and physical reality. He says this control has been enforced throughout history. It's of secondary importance. It should now assume the form of sighting of space visitors. Now, some of these quotes I've shown you are old guys, right? In the movie, I went to Dallas, Texas, to interview the world's leading new guru on ufology. He's a consultant for ancient aliens and UFO hunters and those people on those shows on the TV. His name is Nick Redfern. He's written over 40 books on the subject. And I tell you, when I spoke to him and interviewed him, you'd have thought you were talking to a Christian. He's not. We tried to witness to him and reach him at the end, and he's a lovely guy, but he was clearly resistant. He knows what we believe. So again, listen to what this non-Christian guy says. He says there's the nature of the entities themselves. They practically overemphasize who or what they claim to be. We only have to take a careful look at such cases to see that these incidents are clearly staged managed. It's a game, a scenario. He said, everything to do with trying to emphasize the ET meme. Of course, they could easily avoid us, but here's the deal. They want to be seen. It's not an accident. It's carefully planned, and it's designed to plant an image of ET scientists in the mind of the witnesses. There you go. As I said, we all agree about the nature of it. John Ankerberg is an apologist. He teamed with a Christian ufologist by the name of John Weldon, and he wrote this. He said, how credible is it to think that literally thousands of extraterrestrials would fly millions and billions of light years simply to teach New Age philosophy, deny Christianity, and support the occult? Why would they consistently lie about things which we know are true? Why would they purposely deceive their contacts? Well, that's in keeping with the nature of the evil one, isn't it? That's it. And I mentioned religions, lies. Well, look at this passage in Galatians 1:8. It gives us a heads up. It says, even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we've preached to you, let him be eternally condemned. There's a heads up. The fallen angels might come and preach another gospel to you. Is there any precedent for that? Who's heard of a man called Joseph Smith? The founder of the Mormon cult. He had what I've coined as the visitor experience. He claimed he was met by an angel, told to go out and find some gold tablets, and now we have extra biblical revelation. And the Mormons believe they're the elect. And the rest of us, well, we're on the wrong path, all based upon his singular experience. And by the way, there was another man, you'll have heard of this one, he was called Muhammad. He had exactly the same experience too, ladies and gentlemen. He meditated in a cave for several months, and his sayings are written down on bones and parchments, and later, there's arguments about when, but it was later collated into the Quran. And right today, people are having messages channeled to them, they believe, from alien beings. In the movie, we showed a cult in Switzerland, where this man had information given to him, and he wrote a book called the Talmud Emmanuel, over 1,000 pages, that he claims represents the true life and teachings of Jesus. So you can see where this is centered. It's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus, whether he is God and the Son of God or not. Well, let me deal with this issue. Did God create life on other planets? Lots of people say, well, Gary, you can't say that he didn't because the Bible is silent about such things. But if that's your thought, let me challenge you back, because if the Bible's silent about something and you try to invoke its existence based on silence, it's called an argument from silence, right? It might be better to presume it don't exist from that. But I think if we look at the big picture and purposes of creation and the gospel, we can work it out. Before we do, creationists love this passage in Genesis 1:28. We call it the dominion mandate. That's where God says to man, go and fill the earth, go and subdue the earth. He made us the top of the food chain here, right? Because guess what? What we did here affected creation. So if, these 150 sightings every day, even if a small percentage, were really alien spaceship piloted by aliens created by God, by virtue of their advanced technology, wouldn't they have dominion over us? That would be breaking God's created order, his dominion mandate here on earth. But let's look at the big picture. Romans 8 tells us the whole creation groans and travails under the weight of sin. In Genesis 1:1, you hear the term, God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth means everything. That's a grammatical phrase known as a merism. A merism is when you use the two opposing ends of the subject you're describing to include everything. Let me give you an example. Let's say if we said tomorrow, let's paint the church from top to bottom. You're right, two opposing ends, but implied in that statement means let's paint everything. So the same heavens and earth in Genesis 1 are being reserved for destruction. So the whole universe has been cursed by sin. So if that's the case, poor old Mr. Spock and his fellow Vulcans sitting out there on the planet Vulcan, well, oops, let me go back one. Well, they get diseases, cancers, and they die because of what Adam did here on earth. There are no unfallen parts of the universe. And when God came to this earth, he came as a human being, right? Didn't come as a Klingon or a Vulcan or something like that. Why? Okay, well, he had to redeem human beings, and that's why the Bible calls him our kinsman redeemer. He had to become one of us, related to us by blood from Adam. The church, we're going to be Christ's bride throughout eternity. Is Jesus going to be a bigamist and have lots of brides all throughout the universe? Did he die for all those aliens? See, that one bride for one groom is symbolic of the monogamous relationship, the created order that God made in the Garden of Eden. One man for one woman. And you've got to be a physical descendant of Adam to be saved. Right? These alleged aliens are not descendants of Adam's. They do not qualify for salvation. Jesus was the last Adam, not the second, because there was a real historical first Adam. So summing up, the heavens and earth are going to be destroyed by a fervent heat. So aliens who've suffered the effect of the curse through no fault of their own, perhaps, right, and who can't be saved because they're not descendants of Adam, they're going to get rubbed out at the end of time when God creates a new heavens and new earth. Now, when I'm talking alien life here, I'm talking about alien life kind of in the order of human beings. Sentient, intelligent, self-aware, moral, decision-capable making beings. For God to have created those beings to suffer the opprobrium of the curse with no hope of salvation, well, might be frank, I think that would make God unjust. And that is something he's not. Will the creator of the universe not always do right? And the Bible makes it pretty clear. In 1 Peter 3:18, that Christ died for sins once for all. He's not going to be crucified and raised again on other planets. I believe the Bible's big picture discounts the idea of sentient, intelligent, alien life. But hang on, Gary. Why did God, this is the but, and a lot of people have the but and they don't know, they never reconcile with that. And I've learned over the years, if you're struggling with what I've just said, that there is no alien life out there, right? And I'm not talking about angels, we're talking about ETs. The but is usually, why would God have made the universe so big just for us? I mean, we're like a speck of dust in space, aren't we? Well, let's discuss that. Who's the universe big to for a start? Us or God? Is it big to God? Well, it can't be. He created it. And you know, when we talked about the size of our Milky Way, or, you know, the universe is estimated to be 14 billion light years in age, 28 billion light years across, I believe, something like that. So when we want to measure how big something is, we use, you know, a ruler and certain parameters. So if I said it took 100,000 years to cross the Milky Way galaxy at the speed of light, we have the distance, we have speed, and time. We have three factors. Okay? So let me ask you, if God, as one of his attributes, is omnipresent, you know, is he here right now with us where two or three are gathered together? Is he also right now, you know, 100,000 light years away at the edge of the Milky Way, or at the edge of the universe right now as well? Yes. So let me ask you, how long did it take him to get there? See my point? Does it take him any time? Does he exist in time? See, he does not exist in our physical universe. He's beyond it. He interacts in it, but he's not bound by it. You know, God could have created in 6 seconds if he wanted. In fact, when I read that about the new heavens and earth, I said this morning to a church, I don't even think it takes 6 days. And behold, I saw a new heavens and earth. How can he do that? Because he's the creator. It's not hard. You know why the universe is the way it is? The Bible tells us. The universe, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Believe it or not, I have a very simplistic view of Scripture. I encourage you to have the same thing. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't take outside ideas and impose them on the Scriptures. You know, I think about God speaking to Abraham. Do you remember that? And he said, Abraham, I'll make your descendants like the stars in the sky. Now, I don't know if Abraham lived in a city or had light pollution or whatever like we do, but if you could get out into the American outback, have any of you ever done that and looked up at the night sky? It's incredible, isn't it? They are ablaze with stars. But you know, you can only count about 9,000 stars with your naked eye. And I've said there are billions of galaxies all containing billions of stars. Later on, God repeats his promise to Abraham, I'll make your descendants like the stars in the sky. And remember what he adds? Like the grains of sand on the seashore. Go home, get onto Google tonight. I did it a few years ago and I typed in, how many stars are there in the universe? And I think about the first 12 or 13 pages come up with a little summary. It says, the amount of stars in the sky have been equated with grains of sand on earth. I thought that was kind of neat. But here's the thing. What else does it say about them? God determines their number and calls them each by name. So I tell you what, I'll give you 1,000. If you could count the stars, I'll give you 1,000. If you could count 1,000 every second, you would expire long before you'd even scratch the surface of counting the stars in the sky. How long did it take God to count the stars and name them? He did. He just did. Didn't take him any time. It's not like 1, 2, like you and I have to go through because we exist in time. That's the God we're talking about. That's the Creator. He says, there is none like me. And you can understand why now, can't you? But there's a spiritual battle going on. And the great cosmic war started way back there, didn't it? In the Garden of Eden. What can we learn from tonight? We can learn this. Only the Creator has the power to save you. Maybe you're sitting here tonight and you're not a believer, or you're not so sure. Boys and girls, maybe you're here and you're in a Christian family. Being in a Christian family doesn't make you a Christian. Do you know that? You have to accept what the Creator, Jesus, did to rescue us from this sin-cursed planet. There is nothing you and I can do to save ourselves. And you know, all these people that have been on board a spaceship, I've met lots of them, as you can imagine. And I'm not diminishing their experience. They've been seriously, spiritually affected. But everybody that's allegedly been on the spaceship, nobody had the sense to snatch a towel from the bathroom or something as a physical evidence of their trip. Never happens. No physical evidence of that. The Word, the Alpha, the Omega, the I am that I am, Jesus, made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. I have one exciting bit of evidence. So please don't go. I'm going to mention some of the resources, and I want to do this after the resources. It's going to shock you and going to be the nail in the coffin of this ET hypothesis. But I want you to get information. As I said, we're an information ministry. Our website, there's a whole section on aliens and UFOs. Obviously, I wrote most of the articles there. And boy, that's a pretty hard web address to remember, isn't it, if you want to find out something. When you here, how many were here this morning, by the way? Okay, so quite a few of you weren't. Can I say to you, we won't pass the clipboards, but out on the tables there, if there's one resource you should get, it's Creation Magazine. We've been producing this for over 40 years. And as Armand mentioned, goes to 110 countries. We get people all the time, ministries and colleges saying, can we advertise in your magazine? And we don't accept it. And that's because, hand on heart, I can come before you and say it's about equipping you and equipping your families. And then we want you to leave it on the lunch table at work. So there's some out there. It's a beautifully illustrated colour magazine. Some of the stuff we deal with at a lay level, you know, here's a piece of volcanic rock. And we know the age of the rock from the volcanic eruption was 50 years. And we sent it off to a radiometric dating lab. And it came back with an age of 1.35 million years. So when people say, well, doesn't radiometric dating, aren't they? Don't they do scientific tests to prove the age of things? They do scientific tests, but you can't do a scientific test to prove the age of anything. And when people think fossils take millions of years to slowly form, I love this one, a fossilized teddy bear. I've actually got one of those. They hang them in a cave in England. And to get quick fossils, you just need the right conditions. We have billions of fossils all over the world, some of them petrified in the process of eating each other and giving birth and all sorts of stuff. And it's great evidence of the Bible's history. Noah's flood. Noah's flood. The evidence is all around us. Information changes lives. Look at this young man. He wrote to us and said, your work was very important for me becoming a faithful believer in the Bible. I was an atheist, convinced of evolution until a year ago, and I started to listen to those crazy young earth believers trying to disprove them, and here I am now. Praise the Lord. You see, here is a fact. Tomorrow, it's not maybe or perhaps, our children will be taught evolution in the schools and the colleges as a scientific fact. How are you going to compete with that? Well, it's our job. And evangelism, if I may say, starts at home, ladies and gentlemen. Equipping our children with the arguments that they're going to get in higher education. My first trip back to Australia in 2012, this man came up to me, young man, with tears in his eyes. He started to break down. And he just wanted to thank us. And I said, look, send me an email, write it down, and people might be encouraged by it. Here it is. He said, thank you for your ministry. As a child, a family friend bought me a subscription to your Creation magazine. He says, excuse me, he says, I attended public schools where evolution is taught, but with the information provided to me through your magazine, my faith was never shaken by evolution. I am now a Sunday school teacher, and my favourite topic is showing God's glory through creation. I attribute your magazine as a major contributor to the strength of my faith and my love of science. A magazine. There's no advertising, as I said, in the magazine. There's a children's section in it, and you can go and have a look at some copies there. But we have a database at the office where we keep thousands and thousands of testimonies we've had over the years, just like this. And that's why we've hung tough on the magazine. So when you go out, there are some forms. If you get the magazine for 1 year, it's $29, okay, for the print version. But what we do at our ministry as an incentive to get you signed up is we give you the digital version for free. You can't get it for free online. And that's worth $19 a year on its own. And what we allow you to do when you get the email for the digital is to share it. So you can have a copy, but guess what? Your children and your grandchildren can have a copy. You could email it to them and they could read Creation magazine on their smart device. You also get our free newsletters. Okay, so you get the first issue today. When you sign up, pay today, you take the first issue or the current issue with you, and we're going to give you the free digital version. All right, and if you sign up for 2 years, we're going to give you even more. We're going to give you a free documentary. And this was one of the first ones we made where we retraced Darwin's voyage of the Beagle. This has been on TV stations around the world. And we basically interviewed evolutionists on the Galapagos and South America, and we asked the questions, you know, if Darwin knew today what we know about science, would he have even been an evolutionist? He was a man of his time. He didn't have the information about genetics, for example. But wait, there's more. Okay, I'm going to give you another documentary. And it's this documentary. I did a survey on college campuses in Atlanta. Have you heard about this? Scott may have shared it this morning, where we interviewed youth in colleges who said they were raised in the church, and I asked them 4 questions. And one of them was evolution or creation, what's true? And out of the hundreds of students we interviewed, only 5 of them said they still believed in creation. And so I said, when you were at the church, for those kids who now believe in evolution, I said, when you were in church, did your parents, pastors, leaders, anybody show you the wealth of scientific evidence we have for creation for today? And every single student who said they now believed in evolution, were very clear, they said, no, I've never seen anything. So they only got one side of the story. The handful of kids who still believed in creation, everyone said they had been shown information. The last question was, do you still attend church today? And all those kids who now believed in evolution, except for one young man, no longer attend a church. The kids who said they were exposed to creation, every one of them still attended church. So that's a very good resource. And I asked them their questions, and I said, so what's your best evidence for evolution? And you know, 90% of them, what they said? The fossil record, the fossil record, the fossil record, the rocks with fossils in them. And yet as creationists, that is the easiest thing for us to explain, the global flood of Noah. In fact, the order of burial, the number of types of fossils we see is consistent with what we'd expect with a global flood as well. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I've been in ministry for about 30 years. Marv's one of our friends. He actually helps print and distribute the Creation magazine for us, and he lives here in St. Louis. So he can testify to what the distribution network is like. But you know, when I first started in creation, I said this morning, there are about 4 books on creation. And somebody came up to me earlier and said they cut their teeth on the Genesis flood. That was like the only book in the early days. When you go around that table, that's just a sample of the resources that we have today. We have more information to support what we believe in this crucial foundational area than at any time in the church's history. And that's why I and my colleagues are still so excited to do what we do and bring information to you, because this, honestly, is the most exciting time ever to be a biblical creationist. Genetics, dinosaurs, far from being a poster child for evolution, we find soft tissue and all sorts of stuff that cannot mean that they're millions of years old. So anyway, I could talk for millions of years, but go out there and get the forms. And if you sign up for 2 years, as I say, you get those 2 DVDs as well. Don't forget to put your email address, because we want to send you the digital, all right? You know, this is what we get day in, day out, everywhere. In the media, in the movies, in Jurassic Park, we are saturated with it. And so this information is a method of fighting back, ladies and gentlemen. And every time they have one of these new fossil finds, we usually deal with it in the next edition. The millions of years, the culprit is geology. And most people don't know that. They come up trying to make a day, like, 1,000 years are like a day in the Lord and so on. Or each day in Genesis might be a billion or millions of years each. That looks like a kid's book. Seriously, if you adults want to understand where the millions of years comes from, how to deal with it, and look at the evidence for Noah's flood, that is a great book. I've had a PhD scientist write to me and tell me he learned something out of that book. And yet families do it, and they say their kids are absorbed and engaged because we have some really, really neat illustrations in there. And out there's a few of these left. There are 5 hardcover books in a pack designed to be read to an elementary age child, and they have parent helps in the back. So you can do up some extra research, answer some extra questions. 5 hardcover books there at a good price. The Genesis account. Dr. Jonathan Sarfati is the author of the world's largest selling creation books. He sits opposite me in an office. This is his magnum opus. I call this the Rolls Royce of creation books. If you wanted one book that does everything, covers everything, this is it. It's a theological, historical, and scientific commentary on Genesis 1 to 11. And boys and girls, you're going to hear this when you get into higher education. No real scientist believes in creation. Well, that is just, I'm afraid, not true. We employ lots and lots of them, and that book there has 30 PhD scientists in various areas like biology and geology and astronomy, and some of them are world-leading inventors like Dr. Raymond Damadian, who invented the MRI technology. And how many lives has that saved, for example? And that question I mentioned before, why does a good God allow bad things, is a DVD talk I've got out there. And this is being used in prison ministry here in the States. And we've had some really good testimonies of people coming to the Lord, very evangelical. I actually have a DVD, a whole DVD on that subject, Who Made God? And what is the new heavens and earth going to be like? Well, we don't get into eschatology as a ministry, but we get our insights from what Genesis was like. It's going to be a restoration, remember. I think it's going to be even better than the original. And lastly, here's my book. And it's out there. You can see on the back there, it's been made into a major movie. And the movie is available now, and it actually has bonus features, including the hypnosis theory that wasn't in the movie. And I'll just share one last thing with you. And I shared this morning in one of the talks. And this is an illustration of God's goodness, and please accept it because it surprised us. When we made Evolution's Achilles' Heels, we sent it off to various Christian film festivals, and we ended up winning 2 awards. When we made this, at the end of the movie, you'll see it's all about Jesus. And we said, let's send it to some secular film festivals. And the world's largest film festival is held in Los Angeles every year. It's called the Remy Film Festival. Steven Spielberg and James Cameron and Francis Ford Coppola apparently cut their teeth as young people in that film festival. So we sent it off. And then one day in the mail arrives a lovely plaque saying Alien Intrusion was awarded a bronze Remy in the world's largest secular film festival. Over 5,000 entries they had that year, and the bronze means we were ranked in the top 10% of all entries. It always moves me when I think about that. It just affects me. And I think of all those people in Hollywood, sat down, the judges and whoever, got to see that movie. And what did we feature in the end of the movie when I said it's all about Jesus? Well, let me go through here. In the movie, we share the story. It's because it's up there. Sorry, got to keep going on. In the movie, we share information about two MUFON researchers, I'm out, in Florida. And they said, look, instead of looking at who has been abducted by aliens, is there a significant portion of the population that might not be? I mean, let's think outside the box. And they discovered there was. And who do you think that was? Well, not just Christians. Remember, these guys were not believers themselves, and they said they discovered there were two types of Christians. Using their vernacular, they said, well, there were these talk-the-talk Christians, but then we found these walk-the-walk Christians, what we might describe as Bible-believing evangelicals, and they said they generally seem to be exempt from this phenomenon. So they rang their colleagues in MUFON, and you know what? They all knew about it. And their colleagues said, okay, so what? Aliens don't like Christians. Big deal. That's how they dealt with it. But they said, no, nobody's had a breakthrough. It's all so weird. You know, how can they defy the laws of physics? So they started going back through their research, and they started to discover something, that people in their moment of terror in their room often called on the name of Jesus Christ, resorting to childhood beliefs in their moment of terror, and the experiences stopped. They found records where people sang hymns, said prayers, or they became Christians, and the experiences stopped. What does that tell you about the spiritual nature of this phenomenon, ladies and gentlemen? As I said, I come from a pretty conservative background. Well, these two guys, getting no help from their colleagues, they said, well, let's find out what it is about Christians that aliens don't like. They took themselves off to a local church and enlisted in a Bible study to find out what it was that seems to put these aliens off. And guess what happened to them? They got saved. And one of them is now a pastor, right? And he features in the movie. He works in the military, and he's the chief or the head for MUFON in South Korea as a Bible-believing Christian and creationist. And he's sharing this movie and information with his colleagues in MUFON. And he has confidentially revealed to me that many have come over and jumped ship into this belief that they are dealing with demonic forces. Isn't God good? So anyway, I'll leave it there. I've spoken for probably a good hour, 20 minutes. But I know you all came out to hear this. I want to thank the church and Armand, because I know you guys wanted me to have along and to hear this talk. And I just apologise about my voice tonight. I'm sorry about that. Wish I could have been more dynamic for you. I normally am. But anyway, hopefully the information got conveyed. Pastor, back to you. Thank you. Thank you.